The dust settled on the muddy streets of Redemption Creek as Sarah Chen clutched her crying son closer to her chest. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her newly shaved head, the skin still tender and burning under the relentless prairie heat. Her daughter, barely 5 years old, whimpered beside her, her own small head similarly shorn, tiny hands reaching up to touch the unfamiliar smoothness with confused fingers. They had arrived in this godforsaken town 3 days ago, refugees from the railroad camps where her husband had died in a tunnel collapse. The company had paid her nothing, offered her nothing, and when she couldn't pay the rent on their cramped quarters, the foreman had taken everything. Everything except humiliation. Thieves don't deserve dignity, the foreman had snarled as his men held her down. You Chinese think you can just take from us. Your husband owed money. This is payment. The razor had been dull, scraping painfully across her scalp, then her children's. They had laughed as they did it, those men, their breath reeking of whiskey and hatred. When they were done, they had thrown the 3 of them into the street like garbage. Now Sarah stood in the middle of Redemption Creek's main thoroughfare, her pink silk dress, the only fine thing she owned, a wedding gift from her grandmother in Canton, soaked with mud and tears. The town's residents gave her wide berth, their eyes sliding away from her shame. Some whispered. Some pointed. None helped. Her son's cries grew louder, his small body shaking with hunger and fear. She had no money, no food, no shelter. The Chinese quarter was on the other side of town, but she knew what awaited her there too. The community was small, struggling, and suspicious of outsiders even of their own kind. A widow with 2 children and no prospects would be a burden they couldn't afford. Mama, her daughter tugged at her dress. I'm scared. Sarah knelt in the mud, pulling both children close, her own tears finally breaking free. Sarah said nothing, her arms tightening around her children. She'd learned that white men's kindness often came with a price. Jack seemed to understand her hesitation. He crouched down in the mud, making himself less imposing, his eyes level with hers. Name's Jack Morrison. I work at the Double R Ranch, about 5 miles north of here. We're short-handed for the season. Could use someone who can cook, clean, maybe help with the chickens and garden. Room and board included. Separate cabin for you and your kids. Sarah stared at him, searching for the trap, the hidden cruelty. Why? She finally asked, her English heavily accented but clear. Why what? Why you help? You not know me. Jack was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to her children. My wife was Lakota, he said softly. My daughter would have been about your girl's age. They died of cholera 6 years back. The town doctor wouldn't see them because of what they were. He looked back at Sarah, and she saw old pain in his eyes. I didn't stand up for them then. Figured I'd start standing up now. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to trust him, desperately needed to trust someone, but fear held her frozen. Jack stood, replacing his hat. The offer stands, ma'am. But you should know, those men who did this to you. They're ranch hands for the Blackwell spread. The Blackwells and the Randalls, who own the Double R, aren't exactly friendly. Taking you on might bring trouble. Trouble already here, Sarah said quietly, gesturing to her shaved head, to her sobbing children. A ghost of a smile touched Jack's weathered face. Fair point. He extended his hand. So what do you say? You coming with me? Sarah looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. In China, in the old stories her grandmother used to tell, there were always tests, moments when the gods disguised themselves as beggars or strangers to see who had true virtue in their hearts. She didn't know if this cowboy was a test or a blessing, but she knew her children needed food and shelter, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She took his hand, her small fingers disappearing into his calloused palm, and let him pull her to her feet. I come, she said firmly. I work hard. I pay you back. No debt, Jack said. Just honest work for honest pay. He looked down at her daughter, who was peeking out from behind her mother's dress. "What's your name, little one?" "She no speak English much," Sarah said. "Her name May." "Son name Wei." Jack nodded, then did something unexpected. He unbuckled his gun belt and held it out to Sarah. "Hold this for me, would you?" Sarah took it hesitantly, confused by the gesture. Jack then bent down and scooped up little Wei in his arms. The boy's crying subsided into hiccuping sobs, his small fist clutching Jack's shirt. "May," Jack said gently, holding out his free hand to the girl. "Want to ride on my shoulders? You can see the whole town from up there." The little girl looked to her mother, who nodded. Within moments, May was perched on Jack's broad shoulders, her small hands gripping his hat, a tentative smile breaking through her tears. As they walked through town toward where Jack's horse was tethered, Sarah noticed the stares had changed. They were still watching, but with different eyes now. Jack Morrison's protection meant something here. It meant she and her children were not alone. The ride to the Double R Ranch took an hour. Jack had borrowed a wagon from the livery, setting up a bedroll in the back for Sarah and the children. As they traveled, he told her about the ranch, about old Mr. Randall who owned it, about the work that needed doing. Sarah listened, gradually allowing herself to relax, to hope. When they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, a sprawling homestead with a main house, barn, bunkhouse, and several outbuildings, Sarah felt something unfurl in her chest. It looked like possibility. Mr. Randall, a grizzled man in his 70s, came out to meet them. He took one look at Sarah and her children, then at Jack, and seemed to understand everything without a word being spoken. "She's a good worker, I take it?" he asked Jack. "Haven't seen her work yet, but I'd bet my horse on it." "That old nag?" "Not much of a bet." Randall's stern face cracked into a smile. He turned to Sarah. "Welcome to the Double R, ma'am. The cabin behind the cookhouse is empty. It's small, but it's yours if you want it. Jack here will show you around tomorrow. Tonight, just get settled." Sarah bowed deeply, the gesture automatic. "Thank you. Thank you very much. I work hard. I promise." "I'm sure you will," Randall said. "And ma'am? Whatever happened to you and your young ones?" "That ends here. On my land, you're under my protection. Anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me." That night, in the small cabin that smelled of pine and possibility, Sarah laid her children down on a real bed for the first time in weeks. She stroked their shaved heads gently, whispering promises in Cantonese, promises that things would get better, that they would survive, that they would thrive. Through the window, she could see Jack Morrison standing near the barn, his silhouette dark against the star-filled sky. He was keeping watch, she realized. Making sure they were safe. For the first time since her husband's death, Sarah Chin allowed herself to believe that perhaps the world still held kindness. That perhaps dignity could be restored. That perhaps, in this strange land of contradictions and cruelty, there were still those who would stand up when it mattered most. She touched her own shaved head, no longer a mark of shame but a reminder of survival. Hair would grow back. Dignity, once lost, was harder to reclaim. But with people like Jack Morrison in the world, maybe it was possible.